Hello and welcome. My name is David Bell. I'm the president of Bushwalking New South Wales, and I'm speaking to you from Camaragal country. And I'd like to acknowledge and respect their connections to land, sea, and community. And on behalf of Bushwalking New South Wales, pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their custodianship of the country in which we engage our bushwalking and related activities. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Andy McQueen to speak to us tonight. Andy probably is known to many of you. He's a former president of Bushwalking New South Wales. He's a conservationist, bushwalker, a historian, and he's also the current holder of the Chardon Award. So all those things. Andy is going to talk to us tonight about his book on the man called Francis Barrallier, who some of you may have heard of, and many may not have heard of him, but he did some very interesting things in the Blue Mountains way back in 1802. So I might just now hand over to Andy. By the way, you're welcome to post questions during Andy's presentation, and we'll take questions after that. So I suggest you put them into the chat room, the chat function. So if you have any questions, we'll deal with them after Andy's presentation. Anyway, over to Andy.
Okay, thank you very much, David, for that fantastic introduction. And I'd like to acknowledge I'm sitting here on pretty much on the edge of Gundungurra country in the Blue Mountains, and that's actually quite relevant to my talk. We could actually imagine that we're in the middle of Gundungurra country because the image behind me is taken by Ian Brown amongst the eucalypts on a misty day just near Conangra Walls. Just transport yourselves there to Conangra Walls on a misty day, and there we go. Look, and by the way, it's amazing to see a few familiar faces there from many years ago when I was last seriously involved in what was then Confederation. Look, why do people go bushwalking? There's many answers to that, and people have written PhDs and books and heaven knows what. And there's lots of good reasons for going bushwalking, and I have quite a few of my own. But one of them is to explore, wild places, basically with a view to following people's tracks, and people from the past, that is, whether they be early European explorers or cattlemen from way back or whatever. But I'm particularly interested in first contact times. So what did those first Europeans who wandered into the bush, what did they think about it? What experiences did they have? And by getting out there and following their tracks, you can gain a better appreciation of what they might have been thinking. That to me is a very rewarding thing to do. It's much better than just being an armchair explorer, because you can really just gain a better connection to country, I find, just to understand all those things that were going on. So with that in mind, we're going to go to Gundungurra country in 1802 when this French guy, Francis Barrallier, wandered in with the aim of crossing the Blue Mountains. And I'll just do a bit of screen sharing here if it works all right. And so here we are in a patch of Gundungurra country, a view from the Tenali tablelands looking down across the upper Burragrang Valley in the mists of time there for you. Look, if you're wondering exactly where Gundungurra country is, if you go to any lookout looking south in the Blue Mountains or to Burragrang lookout, basically, as far as the eye can see, is Gundungurra country. So if you're at Conangra Walls, Wombian Caves, Urandri, all those places, they're well and truly in Gundungurra country, as is Lake Burragarang, of course, and that's why it became quite controversial during the recent proposals to raise the levels. Anyway, I want to actually tell some of my own story starting in 1965. This is my introduction to that country when I went on an Easter walk with a whole bunch of fellow senior scouts. This photograph was taken at Bats Camp. I'm sure many of you know Bats Camp, short for Batshit Camp near Colon Caves. And we did a 4-day circuitous walk to Urandari, and basically that really hooked me in that country. And this map hooked me too. This was the map we used. There was no contour map of the region then. And this map was produced by members of the Sydney University rover crew. This is the first edition, I think. The map's called Gundungurra. I had no idea then what Gundungurra meant. And the name Barrallier is sort of scattered across the map here and there. I think there's a Barrallier's Pass mentioned there somewhere. And I didn't know who Barrallier was either. I was just totally absorbed by this amazing map with all its, sketchy material on it. It just dripped with allure, and I was hooked. And during the next few years, into the late 60s, I did a lot of walking in the southern Blue Mountains. Unfortunately, all my slides blew away in Cyclone Tracy a couple of years later, but I scraped together a few old black and whites from various people, and I think this was on one of Chinaman's bluffs north of Urandari, and this is Urandari as it was then, or bits of it. And I think this is me on the Cox's River. Look, in 1972, I disappeared to the Northern Territory for nearly 2 decades, and I often thought about bushwalking back in the Blue Mountains, and I often thought about especially the southern Blue Mountains, which I'd taken to heart. And I guess really it was one of the factors that caused us, and I say us, that's my wife Liz and 3 kids by then, to eventually move back, to move to the Blue Mountains. And I quickly started walking in this country again, and I quickly took an interest in this business about Barrallier and what he did in 1802. What caused me to think about Barrallier, I want to say quickly. Now, I'm thinking back into the mists of time. I think this guy had a lot to do with it. Justice Rails Mitchell was a prominent historian. He was also a bushwalker. He was a member of the Warrigals Club that used to be affiliated with the Federation. And in the late 70s, I actually spent an evening with him at Glen Helen Lodge in Central Australia. It was actually government business that brought us both there, but I think that the subject turned to bushwalking, as it inevitably would. And Rails Mitchell had actually written a paper in 1938 about his ideas about where Barrallier went. And I think the conversation turned to that, and that sort of alerted me to about this interesting subject about Barrallier. So, as I say, when I started exploring again in around 1988, I quickly made it my mission to try and figure out exactly where Barrallier went. I wasn't the first. 1910, Richard Cambadge, a botanist, he came up with his theory. Then Miles Dunphy got into the act in the 1930s, and he decided he figured out where Barrallier wound up in Christie's Creek, and he named it Barrallier's Falls. I don't believe Barrallier went there at all, but I'll come to that. Then there was Rails Mitchell, who refined especially Cambadge's route, and Ray's route is pretty close to what most people accept as the route now. And then there was a guy called Ern Moxley, who was one of Dunphy's colleagues in the in Dunphy's club, and he did some revisions and just changed the ideas about where Barrallier finished. And then there was Ross Brownscombe, an independent adventurer, who also came up with some slightly alternative ideas. So I was far from the first. And the question is, why did all these people take such an interest in it? And why did I? And well, there's a few answers to that. first of all, it's great walking country. Secondly, Barrallier wrote in French a long journal, 20,000 words or so, describing his experiences and, in a way, describing his route. But it's a bit of a puzzle trying to interpret it. And there's ambiguities, which just adds to the allure, really, because you can have good arguments. And then finally, it's fun to walk. It was fun to walk in his tracks and just have that sense of, well, I think he went here. And as I said before, this gives you gives me greater personal connection to country. So I did all these walks, mostly with various members of Springwood Bushwalking Club. Here's one of my compatriots there on the lower right, and we've scrambled up into the Tenali tableland there, and we're looking west. In the middle of the picture in the background is Burns Gap, which, in my view, I think most people's view, Barrallier undoubtedly went through. Over on the left is Urandary Peak, and you've got Mount Kolong there as well. A couple of other crazy photographs from those days. I can assure you Greg King there didn't fall over that cliff. And here's our club president at the time, confronted by one of the little waterfalls up in Wunji Creek. So, yeah, we wandered all over the place, and I put it all together. And in 1992, on the precise 190th anniversary of Barrallier's expedition, I took our two sons and two of their schoolmates on sort of a reenactment on precisely the same days. We didn't do the whole journey. We started by stepping out of the water of Lake Burragurang with the blessing of the water board, I hasten to add. We're seen here at a cave, which at that time I thought was a cave that Barrallier visited. Turns out that wasn't correct, but we'll come to that. But anyway, this all led to a book. Now, I wasn't content with just following Barrallier's track through the mountains. I was really interested in the rest of his life. What was this French guy doing in the mountains? And not a lot had been written about Barrallier's life as a whole, and I realised that what was written in the Australian Dictionary of Biography had a few errors. That was just after some quite cursory research. So after spending a lot of time in the archives at the Mitchell Library, of course this is way before internet days, and writing snail mail letters overseas and all that sort of thing, I produced this little book in 1993. Some of you may have a copy. It actually sold out in a couple of years. It was quite popular. But it was launched by the aforesaid Ray Earls Mitchell in History House in Macquarie Street, an esteemed establishment. And of course, the launch was watched on by, as you can see in the background there, busts of famous colonialists and so on. A wonderful occasion. Maybe some of you were there. Quite a few bushwalkers there. And some of them said, "You've done me out of my retirement project." Anyway, as I say, the book was quite popular. And look, I'm just going to digress very quickly with Barrallier's broader life. You can read my book to get a lot more about it. But Barrallier was born in Toulon in France. And his father was a prominent naval architect or engineer. Come the revolution, the residents of Toulon found themselves in trouble because they were royalists. And if you've seen the movie Bonaparte, the recent movie, it starts off almost at the start by Bonaparte making a name for himself by attacking Toulon to clear out the British fleet that was protecting them. It was in the middle of all that great muddle that the Barrallier family and a few thousand other residents of Toulon escaped with the British fleet, and the Barrallier family found themselves in due course in England. Barrallier earned the patronage of the young Barrallier, Francis Barrallier, earned the patronage of a of a politician by the name of Charles Greville, and ultimately was given a passage to the colony in 1799, not 1800 as was previously thought. And he had no promise of employment. He aspired to be a surveyor and indeed surveyor general. He didn't become surveyor general, not there, but he was taken on by Governor King as an ensign in the Rum Corps, and subsequently also as Governor King's aide-de-camp, which is quite interesting for a young Frenchman, aged only in his late 20s at this stage. So he was set to work. He was given some surveying duties. He didn't do much soldering duties. He was sent. He was sent with the Lady Nelson, a little coastal exploring square rigger, which there's a replica in Hobart. If you've ever been down there, you may have seen it. But he was sent down the coast to help with the survey of the newly discovered Bass Strait. That was a short-lived expedition, but he managed to do the first surveys of Western Port and a little bit of Jervis Bay around Green Patch. Subsequently, up to the Hunter, he did the first surveys of the Hunter and the Williams Rivers, and subsequently the Patterson, the lower portions of those rivers. And then he was sent to find a way across the Blue Mountains by Governor King. Now, it was deemed inappropriate in those days for military officers to be going exploring, or that was the view of the head of the Corps, Colonel Patterson. So this was when Governor King took Barrallier on as his aide-de-camp and said, right, I'm not actually sending you on a trip to try and cross the Blue Mountains. I'm sending you as an ambassador to the King of the Mountains. That was the official reason given for the trip, but obviously that wasn't the real reason. Curiously, as we'll see, he did sort of meet the King of the Mountains. I'll come back to the Blue Mountains expedition shortly, but his career in New South Wales came to an abrupt end in 1803 because he essentially became the meat in the sandwich between the ongoing feud between the Corps and the Governor. The Corps and the Governors had all sorts of bad relationships long before Bligh came along. Anyway, Barrallier probably said some unwise things, and King took a poor view of that, and essentially Barrallier found he couldn't really stay there any longer, submitted his resignation, which was never accepted, and he found himself a bit later working for the army in the West Indies. And just before I go, this is one of the many maps he produced. This is a surprisingly accurate map of the lower Hunter and Williams rivers. The names are switched around for those rivers compared with what we know today, and that's another story that I won't go into now. So he spent 10 years or so in the West Indies, furthering his career. During that time, he was, for a while, the aide-de-camp to the officer in charge of the entire British fleet fighting the French. And in the latter years there, he was appointed the Surveyor General of Barbados, which we'll come back to. So there you go. So here's this book. Most of that stuff's in my first book. Inevitably, when you write a book, new information comes to light, and you find you've got things wrong and all that sort of thing. And as the years went on, there was more of that. And other people, a few different people came up with slightly different ideas, and in a couple of cases, very different ideas, and when Barrallier went. And my attitude for many years was, I'll let all that stuff go to the keeper. I've got other things to do. But ultimately, I thought I better do something about this and write a new book. And all sorts of new information come to light thanks to the internet, and thanks to some other researchers around the world who've done aspects of his history. And I think it was actually, I've made a commitment to write a new book during the first year of COVID, when everybody was hunting around for, changes of direction. So, yeah, you can blame COVID for my new book. But some of the things that caused me to write the new book, well, one was this. This is Barrallier's map of Barbados, which might look particularly uninteresting now, but it has now become unique. And you can find it online in the University College of London, because it turns out that this is a unique source of information about plantation owners at the time on Barbados. And of course, the plantations were slave plantations. And down there on the bottom of the map is the names of all the plantation owners, and the map shows where their plantations were. So in all the moves towards restorative justice that's going on now to give some justice to the descendants of slaves, this is a unique map. So I'm sure Barrallier never intended it that way, but there you go. A few other interesting things emerged, like this is John MacArthur, the well-known John MacArthur. It turns out he referred to Barrallier as the Frenchman. So I started to get the idea that Barrallier's French origins might have been significant in his behaviour and his achievements in the colony. Indeed, this guy, Nicolas Baudin, in 1802, he was the commander in charge of a French expedition which visited the colony. A lot of research has been done about the Baudin expedition, and it's become increasingly obvious to me from my own researches that Barrallier crossed paths with these guys on a number of matters, and I think it influenced the way he thought, and it certainly comes through in the things that are expressed in his journal. And the other thing that made me want to revisit my book was this, the traditional people. So there's a whole bunch of Dharawal and Gundungurra people who come to play during the expedition, either as guides or people he met, or and so forth. 15, in fact. And in my first book, yeah, okay, so I recognised all that, but I didn't really treat them as real people, really. I wanted to flesh out who they were, and a lot more is known about some of them. And what I didn't realise too back in 1993 was there's many people today who are undoubtedly descendants of those guys, even though we can't necessarily make the direct links because there was this big gap in the genealogical information, if you like. But so I just threw this picture in here because this is a guy called Erigini, who was allegedly king of the Natai tribe. We're not quite sure what the Natai tribe embraced, but he might have been a son of one of the people that the Barrallier had to do with. This was a sketch by William Govett in 1826, by the way, taken down near Mount Jalor. So all these sort of things encouraged me to write a new book. And then there was the journal itself. Now, the journal exists, as I say, in French, in the archives in England. It was only unearthed in the 1890s. And the Historical Records of New South Wales did a transcription and translation, which people have been relying on. I was very suspicious for many years about the accuracy of some of the translation, and I also knew that some of the transcription wasn't quite right. Oh, before I go any further, this wasn't his original journal. Only a translation of one or two pages of his original journal exists. If it ever turns up, it'll be a goldmine. But anyway, we've got this, and I was keen to sort of revisit it before, in conjunction with writing my new book. And that was going to be an immense task, but I was fortunate in meeting, through my mutual friend Peter Hathley, I met this wonderful lady, Milena, who is multilingual. And I just went along to Milena with just a couple of questions about a couple of specific sentences. I said, look, is this translation right? And she thought about it and we discussed it and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, she took such an interest in the whole journal that she is largely responsible, with a bit of help from me and Peter Hathley, actually, for doing a complete new transcription and translation, which I've published free online. You can find it on Trove at the National Library. And look, there aren't any huge, there's a few corrections to figures and numbers and a few little points here and there. There's nothing major in the revisions, but I find this one particularly interesting. He refers in the expedition to going on excursions into the mountains. And, well, sorry, the translation we're all used to talks about excursions, but in fact, the transcription and the transcription has has the word incursions or incursion, and that translates directly to incursions. So, you know, we've always talked about Barrallier's excursions in the mountains as if they were some sort of Sunday school picnic. In fact, he used the word incursion, which has different connotation to my way of thinking. Okay, he didn't maybe think in terms of incursions into other people's country, even though they were, and even though actually did really realise they were other people's country. But nevertheless, it sort of better conveys an idea of what was really going on, I think. Yep, so this is my new book, which I published last year, and it certainly wasn't in History House. It was at Burra Green Lookout. All the people gathered there in the foreground table are Dharawal and Gundungurra elders. And on the right there is Auntie Sharon Halls of the Gundungurra, and she did a welcome to country for the launch. So I was very grateful for that, because I regard the whole thing as a sort of a reconciliation event. Okay, so just a bit about the thing, about the expedition, its route. And I think you really have to buy my book if you want to look at this in detail, because I can't labour over the detail on a map like this. But look, before 1802, there'd only been a couple of major ventures into the mountains, and there's Matthew Everingham got up to Mount Tootie somewhere there, and Henry Hucking might have got to King's Tableland in 1794. That's speculative. One thing that did happen was a guy called John Wilson, who was something of an outlaw. He got almost to the side of Goulburn by going down past Berrimah and what have you. That was in 1798. We never hear about that because there's not many mountains to cross after you get to Goulburn, as I'm sure you'd agree. But anyway, that's the case. That was all hushed up, it would appear. So Barrallier's expedition, he did a preliminary trip from the start at Windsor and down through Penrith, basically following the foothills, went through Camden. He was apparently looking for an opening where he had a plan to try and take a bullock cart and a staged sort of military exercise to get through the mountains. And he eventually settled at a place down south of the Oaks that he called his depot, and the place was called Natai. Now, at this stage, all through that he had a Dharawal guy by the name of Gogi, and Gogi indicated that he would be able to go down the creek from where this Natai depot was, and that's Shays Creek. The depot site is almost certainly at a place known especially to the Catholic Bushwalking Club as Wooglamai. And so we went back to, after this preliminary trip, we went back to Parramatta. The main trip was took place in November, December 1802. They took a bullock cart to get to the depot, and they went on a circuitous route around through Picton so they could get the cart there. The cart went backwards and forwards while he did 3 incursions into the mountains. So we've switched north, and the north is now to the right. Magnetic west is vertical here. So the Natai depot is down the bottom. First 4 days with Gogi as guide and another Aboriginal guy by the name of Bungan, and always with some convicts and soldiers as well. He went down Shays Creek, down the Natai River, up the Wallandilly, tried to climb Tenali Peak for a view, failed in that, and hang on, just lost my pointer. There we go. And then he ran into the, if you like, the king of the mountains in the name of a guy called Gundungurra, who was the Barrallier clan chief of the Gundungurra people. At this stage, the wheels fell off a bit because Gogi had bad history with these guys, and Gogi wanted to retreat, and Barrallier had no alternative but to retreat. So that was the end of the first incursion. There was further delays while waiting for the bullock cart, and then Barrallier went off again on his main incursion, which took him all the way up the Tenali Valley, through Burns Gap, across the Carmung River, up Christie's Creek and Winji Creek to Johnson Falls. At that stage, and I have to say, it had two young fellas, a Dharawal guy and a Gundungurra guy with him at this stage. They weren't familiar with most of that country, so you wouldn't describe them as guides, but they were intermediaries. There was a second meeting with Gundungurra, and a cultural appropriate meeting took place, or nearly took place. And I have to say, with the first meeting too, on the first incursion, the meeting was culturally appropriate. The fact that Gogi wanted to flee was a side issue, but Barrallier was relatively well received and behaved appropriately when that meeting took place. So he turned back at Johnson Falls basically because we were a hopelessly rugged country, and I'll show you a couple of pictures in a minute. But usual story: running out of supplies, boots falling off, and all that sort of thing, and they weren't finding much suitable food to eat. There was a third incursion where he attempted to go walk up the Wallandilly, hoping it would find a new opening through the mountains, but he basically gave up on that one after a while. Morale was low amongst his men, and it was almost Christmas, and they went home. So a few things about this. It was a failure in terms of crossing the Blue Mountains, obviously. And the reason it failed, well, there are multiple reasons, but one was he chose an awful bit of the Blue Mountains to try and cross. As anyone who's driven to Urandri knows, there ain't many direct routes across the mountains in that country. There's no sort of simple ridge like there's the one that goes through Katoomba, if you like. So it failed, but it's actually a unique expedition, and it's unique for several reasons. And one is that it's unique because you can still walk a lot of that route. Some of it's underwater, and some of it's in Schedule 1 country where you're not supposed to go, but that still leaves the western half of the expedition quite accessible to bushwalkers. A little bit scrubby at the moment, but that'll be a transient situation. And it's mostly protected by Canangra Boyd and the Natai wilderness areas. But as for the expedition itself, it has some unique features. And one is this amazing journal he wrote. I was just talking to Uncle David King, one of the Gundungurra elders, the other day, and he said, "Oh yeah, look, I really treasure this journal because it says so much about my Gundungurra people." So there's all of that, and indeed, Barrallier comes across as quite a, for his time, quite a man sympathetic to the Aboriginal people he meets. He's definitely a friend to them. Sure, he makes a few sweeping statements about the nature of Aboriginal people, like, being cruel and what have you, but reflecting fellow colonialists. But he's quite advanced in his thinking in a way. In his journal, he makes it clear that he understands that different Aboriginal people have different country. Now, I can't find anywhere in writings before Barrallier where that is expressed. He also acknowledges that you can't just walk into other people's country without suitable protocol. So, these are quite advanced sentiments for his time. And I actually think he was influenced by some of the people he met in the Bodang scientific expedition, so-called scientific expedition that I mentioned before. Excuse me a moment. Yeah, I think when we reflect on all those things, it just adds up to a really special, not only expedition, but the things that are recorded. There's also whoops, why isn't that going? Yep, there we go. There's also the things he said about the natural history along the way. Now, this is the Natai River. He came down Shays Creek, which comes down the far left, down the Natai River before it was flooded by Lake Burragurang, and swung into the Wallandilly, the upper Burragurang. This photograph's from the 1930s and taken above the Natai Junction. Now, we look at all this clear farmland and think, well, it obviously wasn't like that when Barrallier was there. But if we read his journal, it turns out that it probably was a bit like that. He talks about all those plains beside the river having trees few and far between. I can't remember his exact words. And today we can say, right, well, the Gundungurra people obviously managed it that way. It was subjected to frequent burning to promote the grass, no doubt about it. The interesting thing is that when he's up on sandstone country and the like, he often talks about scrub. And yeah, I wrote a paper sort of critiquing Bill Gamage's assumptions when it comes to places like the Blue Mountains, and I think people like early explorers like Barrallier who do say things that would call to question Bill Gamage's idea that every inch of Australia was managed. Now, on the right-hand side there, you've got Tenali Peak up there, and there's a close-up of Tenali Peak. This is the peak he tried to climb. Now, he's unsuccessful. Really, the interesting thing is here in his attempt, he came across two brush-tailed rock wallabies. He describes them perfectly. This is the first recording of brush-tailed rock wallabies ever made. On the way down the mountain, he sits down and tells how he was delighted to hear this. Well, he didn't use the word lyrebird, but he talks about this pheasant, and it's undoubtedly he's talking about this calling lyrebird. The amazing thing is that there'd only been one recording or mention of what was obviously lyrebirds before this in the colony, and that was by John Wilson near Pheasant's Nest in 1798. No one in the Sydney area had talked about what was obviously a lyrebird. They don't appear to have been in the Sydney area, which is quite extraordinary. Likewise, earlier in the expedition, Barrallier talks about koalas. Again, John Wilson had talked about koalas. No one in the Sydney area ever had before that. So there's some interesting bits of history there. If he had climbed Tenali Peak and gone along the top of the tableland a bit, he would have got a view like this, but he didn't have the advantage of that. And when you're down on all those ridges and things down on the Tenali, basically, I can assure you, without a map, you've got very little idea of what's going on. He passed through Burns Gap there, which is sort of a bit on the right. And just before he did so, he sheltered in almost certainly this particular cave, not the one I showed earlier on. He talked about it, how it was the home of wombats. It's still the home of wombats, I'm pleased to tell you. And wombats is another animal that were never recorded in the Sydney vicinity before. Well, this isn't the Sydney vicinity, I guess. So he wasn't the first person to talk about wombats, but none of his predecessors talked about wombats in the Sydney area, which is a puzzle to to ecologists. This is looking across Burns Gap. He climbed the peak there, Axe Head Mountain, for a view to the west. Depending on whether you read one of the letters he wrote or his account, you get different ideas about what he thought of that view. But anyway, he found his way to the Cowmung. He described the junction with Christie's Creek in precise terms, just like it is today. And not only that, he talked about going for a stroll up the creek and finding fossils. And if you know what you're looking for, you'll find those fossils today. He sent a couple of his men up what we now call Cambridge Spire to suss out a route ahead. They came back and said, there's all these pyramid mountains, mate, you can't go up there. So he didn't. He went up Christie's Creek. That seemed got into a few difficulties like this and more difficulties like that. And finally he got to Johnson Falls in Wingy Creek, which is a tributary of Christie's. And look, the incredible thing was, here he writes in his diary at some length about, you know, how the hardships were so horrible. But he also encamped just down the creek from this. He also wrote a note in his journal about the yellow-throated scrub wrens, which are nesting in the trees over his head. And he wrote a detailed account of these scrub wrens and how they made their nests. And it's actually incredible. And faced with the difficulties of the expedition, he had the wherewithal to observe this stuff and write it. And in fact, going back through, you know, all his preceding days, he frequently talks about, oh yeah, you know, I had my people make me a little bark hut with a spot with a view, and I admired the scenery. He actually really loved the mountains, and this comes through. And I didn't mention, he lived to the ripe old age of 80. Okay. Retired in London with an English wife, and in his obituary, an inordinate amount of attention is given to this Blue Mountains trip. You know, he lived to 80. This whole thing took a few weeks. He did heaps of other amazing things in his life, and yet this expedition features in his obituary. And this could only have happened because he told people about what had happened. You know, he told his tales of the Blue Mountains, and I think he really took the place to heart. So, you know, winding up, you can really see, I think you can still have a significant adventure. I hope you appreciate from just the last few pictures. You can still have a great adventure, just like Barrallier is in that country. And it is, you know, protected by wilderness. And for my part, you know, thinking about Barrallier and Gundungurra people enhances those adventures, just like, you know, following explorers somewhere else does as well. And personally, I find it enriches my connection to country. And look, here's some, not very far from there, there's a set of grooves here, and these sort of things really doubly enhance enrich your experience in these areas, as I'm sure everybody knows. But you don't actually need to have physical evidence. You just need to pause and feel the spirits sometimes, I think. And I'll wrap up at that, and just with a quick ad, if anyone wants to buy my book, it's in a lot of independent bookshops, and or my website there, andymcqueen.com. And I guess I'm open to a few quick questions.
Thanks very much, Andy. While people are assembling some questions, yeah, you can either put them on the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, just ask Andy direct. But I'll just put one question in now. So he returned, about 1816 from the Caribbean? And so did he go back to England? Yes. In the ensuing years, he made a couple of trips back to his hometown in France because the war was over with France. But yes, no, he settled in England on various half-pay arrangements and so on, as he was promoted up through the ranks without actually any active service. Right. And are there any actual memorials to him in the area where he went?
No, I think at Wooglamai there's a monument of some sort. I can't recall exactly. It's a while since I've actually been there. Yes, oh, that's right. There's a little monument that talks about how he recorded the word cooee, Aboriginal word cooee, which is actually not correct. John Hunter, subsequently Governor Hunter, recorded cooee on the Hawkesbury River some years before. But yeah, so there is a little monument mentioning Barrallier at Wooglamai. But Offhand, I can't think of another. But there's a lot of places that have the name Barrallier, and a lot of when it comes to the features in the Blue Mountains, they're mostly in a place where Barrallier never went.
Okay, well, there's a question here from John Gray. Could you tell us again how many pages or words remain of his diary journal as recently transcribed?
Yeah, it's around about 20,000 words. Yeah. Yeah, so there was an original journal. This is obviously a rewrite he did for the one we know is a rewrite he did for Joseph Banks. But there was a rough journal which Banks couldn't read. Just in the records, there's a translation of what appears to just be the first couple of pages of that. Almost certainly the original journal would have had sketches of the landscape and probably some of the Aboriginal companions, but they didn't move over to the rewrite, unfortunately.
And there's no clues to what happened to the original?
No. I have some theories that I expound on, a theory that I expound on in my book, that there's reason to think it might have finished up in France as a result of the interest taken in Barrallier by Francois Perron, who was the guy who wrote up the account of the Baudin expedition, because Baudin had died.
Yeah. Some other comments coming through. Peter Colhagen says, a big thanks to you for the talk and congratulations on the excellent book. It's very much worth the read. There you are. There's a fan. Lots of inspiration for walks, he adds. And there is a question. Leonie Belt asks, please give us the website address again to purchase the book. Kirsten, can we just add that into the chat? And that means people can get it direct.
Yeah, so Andy McQueen author.com.
All one word?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not
there we are.
It's just
Kirsten's just put that up.
Right.
And you said all independent booksellers.
Yeah, it's in all the Blue Mountains bookshops and a couple of the independent shops in Sydney.
Yeah. There's no other questions, but you mentioned the flooding of the Warragamba. What I do know, there was actually quite a thriving Gundungurra community there, and those people were moved out in the late 1950s. And my understanding is some of those people ended up at La Perouse. Is that correct?
I don't know, David, to be honest. I know some of their descendants here in the Blue Mountains for sure.
Right. Yeah. But it's just what I understand is that they had settled, they had farms and so forth. It was quite a thriving community, and they were actually still living on their land.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's quite, in a way, quite tragic what happened. Yeah. You'd imagine if the dam never went ahead, they'd still be there.
Yes, that's right. And so would a lot of other people of various race too, I have to say. But yes. It's something it's hard to contemplate now. It's something that just happened in the 50s and they had to put up with it. Yeah. And yes. now we know, of course.
Does Barrallier's journal give information?
Sorry?
About the wildflowers, trees and so forth?
Oh, look, so he's not too good on his botany. He talks about a few trees, and for instance, when he's going up Christie's Creek, he talks about stinging trees, and they're undoubtedly still there.
Yes.
He's not a botanist in the same way that George Cayley was, his rival George Cayley. But he's actually stronger on geology of all things. When you read his journal, his geological comments don't actually make sense until you put it in the context of the understanding of geology of his times, and suddenly it makes a whole lot of sense. And one then asks the question, well, where did he get his knowledge of geology? And anyway, there's a few ideas of mine about that in the book. Just while I mention Cayley, if I've got a moment.
Yep.
Cayley was very much, George Cayley was very much Barrallier's rival. He didn't like him very much. Well, Cayley didn't like Barrallier very much, I don't think. And Cayley spent a bit of time trying to figure out where Barrallier had gone, and tried to follow his car tracks at one stage, which is all that quite amusing, actually. I uncovered some of Cayley's writings on the subject. Cayley was subsequently sent to follow Barrallier's expedition a few years later, because the governor wasn't well. Cayley convinced the governor that Barrallier didn't know where he was going, and therefore Cayley should go. But anyway, Cayley just followed the same tracks basically and turned back. And I think he was able to follow the same route because he took the same young Aboriginal guy, Budbury, with him.
Question from Kirsten. Andy, do you continue to have connections with the Gundungurra and other First Nations groups?
Yes, I do. Yes, I mentioned I was talking to Uncle David King just the other night, as it happens, about Barrallier. But one of the things I've known a number of First Nations people in the Blue Mountains for quite a while, but in writing my new book, I thought I had to get to know a couple of them better, because I wanted to just suss out what they really thought about Barrallier and get some of their own ideas. So it's I think it's important actually that to touch base with people and try and enhance one's own understanding of country by understanding how they're connected.
Yeah. Kirsten also adds that these days outdoor adventure educators are running incursions, outdoor adventure within the school ground. Paul Jennings adds several Gundungurras went to La Perouse before the inundation of the Burragorang. Some of these people and also Jim Smith have written up a lot of this history.
Yes.
Yeah.
I should acknowledge that when it comes to the Indigenous history of the area, Jim Smith is one of the people who's written a great deal about that. Yes.
Yeah. And just returning to the theme of outdoor ed, many campuses for outdoor ed are in the bush. Example, Barker College at I can't quite read. Mount Vic.
Yes.
So good. Yeah. Back to Kirsten. What do First Nations people think of bushwalkers these days?
I think the answer is there's all sorts of mixed views on that. I spent a lot of time in the Wallamai at one stage doing rock art research, and we had various Indigenous people involved in that too, and we got on very well. Yeah. So,
Nicola Leconte says, is there any suggestion that Barrallier left any descendants in Australia?
No, he doesn't. Well, who knows? But there's no evidence that he left descendants anywhere. Although he married after he left the West Indies, they didn't have any children. Who knows whether there was any in reality? Yeah.
Well, we're coming up to 8:30, so I think we might, unless anyone has an urgent question, might close it there. Thank you very much, Andy. That's been fascinating, and I recommend everyone. One more question. Have you written other books of interest to us bushwalkers? I think you have.
Yeah, I've written. If you don't count the first Barrallier book, I've written 4 others. Is it 4? I think so. And they're mostly relevant to bushwalkers. So there's Back from the Brink, which is the full title is Blue Gum Forest and the Gross Wilderness. That's still of interest to a lot of people. It's been around for a while. And a book called Wayfaring in Wallamai, Stories of People in Wilderness. And that features a few bushwalkers and other people who've wandered around the Wallamai. Again, following tracks. Yeah.
And I think people can find out more about those books by going to your website, which
Indeed.
Kirsten has displayed up. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, once again, thank you very much, Andy. That's great. I think Kirsten's organising a gift for you, but think that will be, as I say, in the mail.
Thanks.
So, yes, thank you very much, Andy, and see you another time.
Yep. Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. We just have a brief item now about club and Bushwalking New South Wales business. We did list an update about the Constitution. That's just some integration of the latest constitutional amendments by fair trading. So we're working through that, and if we will advise clubs if there's we don't think there's anything important in it. It's a fairly minor update, but we're looking into just seeing what that means. I would suggest if your club has a very old constitution, it'd be worth visiting Fair Trading New South Wales website and seeing whether it might be time to update your constitutions. Or these things don't have to be done every year, but it's timely to do them every 5 or 6 years, and particularly if something major is announced by fair trading. But anyway, we'll update people a little bit more on that later. And we're going to give us a bit of an update on 2025 regional and metro affiliation fees, but we're going to defer that to the May meeting because we'll be a bit more informed about what we're proposing to do. So again, stay tuned for that. We also have a little item called Update from Clubs. So if there's anyone out there in Clubland who may want to tell us something interesting. Going, gone. All right. So, Kirsten, the final item is the prize.
It is indeed. I do find it difficult to, there we go, registrants, to find this particular report out of all registrants of people who attended. What I can share with you is the lovely book that sorry, go over there, share screen, a lovely book that we want to give to Andy in thanks for his presentation. This is a book that actually David Bell has selected, third edition on the Australian Alps, which I hope you will enjoy. Also, our winner of tonight's, Paddy Ballon, that should come up. No, it doesn't. Okay. Yeah, don't worry. So stop sharing. So in terms of the people who are going to win, who's going to win tonight, we have Paddy Pallon prizes that Paddy Pallon have kindly given us. And I have a list of yeah, it's not very good. The list I get out of only gives me the 111. So people who actually registered, not the people who have attended. So do you want to, at the moment we have 35 participants.
Is it 5 prizes?
Well, I think it's 1 at the moment.
1. All right. So I'll just come up with a number between 1 and 35.
Yeah.
All right. I was going to say something to. Let's say something about Francis Barrallier. I'll say 16.
Ian Cox.
There we are. Congratulations, Ian. Well done. So Ian just has to provide you with a mailing address.
Yes.
Ian, can you do that? You could put that in the chat and then Kirsten could collect that.
Excellent. I've just texted him in the chat.
Okay, we'll do that. All right. Okay, yep. Excellent. Good. Well, that brings us to the end of the meeting. once again, thank you, Andy, for that terrific talk. I'm going
Oh no,
to.
sorry. There was one more thing. Sorry, I just
Oh,
wanted to
what was the?
launch
Someone
a
wants to know what the
poll.
prize was. Well, we don't know
Uh,
that, do we?
no, so bushwalk. I mean, Paddy Pallins. I'll just launch a poll while you're thinking about, like, while you're listening to me go on about this. Paddy Pallins have kindly offered to donate a prize. They were going to donate five, but we'd like them to actually mail it to you. So we're only asking for one. So hopefully it will be a bigger prize that they've generously offered. So great to so please fill in the poll. We would like to know how we can improve, what we are doing for our meetings. If you've got any ideas about speakers you'd be interested in, format, timing, anything like that, let us know. And we've got so far 60% have answered. So I'll give them a couple of minutes to complete their answer.
Okay. And while we're just closing, I'll just mention our next meeting is in May. So that'll be the third Tuesday in May, which is May the 20th. And with the theme of that evening will be development in national parks. And we've got two speakers. James McCormack, who's the editor. Is James McCormack? I've got it right. Who's the
Yes.
editor of Wild magazine, and a fellow from Tasmania whose name I forget, and Kirsten will remind me.
David Brown. I mean, sorry, Dan Brown
Dan
with
Brown.
yeah, Broun. And we'll probably also hear from Sonia Underhall, who's in Queensland, and she is working very hard all the time to try and protect national parks in Queensland. And she's got a lot of expertise and experience in, you know, taking that action and succeeding. So we will have some good news as well as some challenges that you might like to take on.
Okay, thanks, Kirsten. And the final question from Chris Dewhurst was, what is the best way to stay connected? I presume with Bushwalking New South Wales.
So I would recommend you joining our mailing list. I can send that momentarily. I'll put that in the chat in a second. We send out a newsletter every month, and we also send out other invites to events such as specific meetings for our clubs, such as at the moment we're running a new president's meeting with which David Bell is leading, and that's been really wonderful. And people have really enjoyed it. We're about to launch another small meeting called the Small Clubs Alliance, and the idea of that is for small clubs to share their challenges and their wins with each other, and hopefully make it easier for each other. And then we also have a fantastic training set of training that we'd recommend everybody does in our clubs. And you can learn about these things on our website, and you can also learn about them in our YouTube channel.
Here we go.
Hello,
Okay.
Phil Murray here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've got a question for Andy McQueen. He's still on the link up, I think.
Yes.
This is a bit left field for you. I've just done the overland track. Love doing these tracks. What about a Barrallier track from Shays Creek across to Gundungurra Walls? Has anyone suggested that to you before?
It's not a new idea. Oh, sorry. The idea of a Barrallier track's not new, but the plan was to have it going from Mittagong to Katoomba, which bore no resemblance at all to to Barallier's route. Well, so walking line to Gundungurra Walls now, there'd be a few problems there. First of all, you've got some Schedule 1 lands, which means basically you get fined about $20,000 if you enter within 3 k's of the stored water. You've got the stored water itself. So, yeah, basically you can only do
the problems to be overcome.
And then, of course, being wilderness, it's not appropriate to actually sort of put in built infrastructure and actually build tracks as such. So you could do it'd be possible to do some sort of app, I suppose, that guided you along the way and interpreted it. But yeah, that'd be it.
That's not going to happen in my lifetime.
No.
Andy, it's reminded me, some years ago, there was a bit of a splash on media from a proposal, I think, from Wallandilly Council about some sort of circuit walk which seemed to get into the Burragorang Valley and then link up with various sort of, I guess, fire trails in this circuit. And I presume it started somewhere down in the Picton area. So it probably overlapped with where Barrallier went. But yeah, I don't think anything happened with it because it seemed to just disappear.
Yes, no, that's right. I haven't heard anything of it recently, and I can't remember the details either. But
I do know it went into the Sydney waterland, so it would have been required to get permission from them.
Yes,
and they may have just said no.
Yep, it could be.
Yeah. What other questions are they? Well, someone wants to know about, this is not going to be probably known for many people, but a thing called the Great Escarpment Trail, which is nothing to do with what Andy was talking about. Someone was asking where it's up to. Well, we've set up a friends group, and we're about to go have a sort of internet profile. So we're still at that stage. So nothing much to report at the moment, but there will be. So we'll put some stuff up on Bushwalking New South Wales website when we've got more to tell people. But it hasn't died, it's still there. So for those who don't know, it's a proposed walking route, I think it's fair to call it, rather than a track, excuse me, from Barrington Tops to Boonah in southeast Queensland. So it's a big project. So both Bushwalking New South Wales and Bushwalking Queensland are supporting it. But there is a friends group, and when we have an internet profile, we can put that information about how you can join the friends.
Bill Murray here. Another quick question, if I may, again to Andy McQueen. Is Mr. Barrallier an explorer, or should we use another term for him? Is that contentious at the moment?
Sorry?
Is that term contentious?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. You mean was it an invader or whatever? I'm happy with explorer. Look, there's so many different views on that sort of thing. It's yeah. Call him what you like. Yeah.
And just sort of follow-up question about the Great Escarpment Trail, about information about where it goes. I think the best thing to that person is if you email Bushwalking New South Wales, we can follow that through where you might get it. We actually, kind of our preference at the moment is to do it at the club level. So if you're a member of a club, it'd be really great getting your club to contact us. But you're welcome to email us and we can tell you something more. Okay. On the basis of that, I think we're all finished. So I think we might close. Again, thank you again, Andy. Thank you all for turning up and asking interesting questions, and hopefully see a number of you in May. All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much.